I'm Roger the Convict, and I was playing the gum leaf then, and the old gum leaf, I'm sure it was the convicts' musical instrument of choice. All they had to do was just lean up and pluck a leaf off the bush, and away they went. Now, I'm not that good at musically, but I know I've got a flair for writing, and I've written this book, and it's called Convicts to Botany Bay, and it covers the first 7 years of the voyage and settlement in Sydney Cove, Port Jackson. And it's a good read, and it's about a farming family in County Clare, and they had this recurring dream of a faraway place called Botany Bay, and after a failed potato crop with the blight, they decided to follow that dream, and they got on the first fleet sailing ships in 1788. So they travelled with the fleet, and through their adventures you learn about the voyage and a lot about the history of our colonial past. Hi, I'd like to sing about the old wattle hut and what it's like to live in one of these. If you listen to the words of the song, you'll get a fair idea. Oh, my name is Roger the Convict, and I'll have you understand, I've seen a lot of ups and downs while sailing over the sea. I once was well-to-do, me lads, but now I'm so hard up, I'm forced to go on rations in an old wattle hut, in an old wattle hut, in an old wattle hut. I'm forced to go on rations in an old wattle hut. 7 pounds of flour, 7 pounds of beef, some biscuit and some tea. That's all they give a hungry man until the 7th day. And if you're not mighty sparing, you will go with a hungry gut. That's one of the great misfortunes of the old wattle hut. In an old wattle hut, in an old wattle hut. That's one of the great misfortunes of the old wattle hut. The bucket I wash me feet in as to cook the tea and stew. They'd say I'd be getting mighty flash if I should ask for 2. The table's just a sheet of bark, God knows when it was cut. It was blown from off the rafters of the old wattle hut. In the old wattle hut, in an old wattle hut. Of course the rations in an old wattle hut. I've had the rain come pouring in just like a perfect flood, especially through the great big hole where once the table stood. It leaves me not a single spot where I can lay me nut, but the rain is sure to find me in the old wattle hut, in the old wattle hut, in the old wattle hut. The rain is sure to find me in the old wattle hut. Beside the fire I lay me down, wrapped up in 2 old rugs. You couldn't call it comfort, though it seems to lure the bugs. And now I've sung my little song as nicely as I could. Remember Roger the Convict in the old wattle hut, in the old wattle hut, in the old wattle hut. Remember Roger the Convict in the old wattle hut. In the year 1787, the British government was looking for a place to send their convicts. Their jails were overcrowded, and America didn't want to take their convicts anymore because they got independence from Great Britain in 1783. So the British government remembered that Captain Cook in 1770 had discovered Botany Bay, and that it had pasture for sheep to graze on. So they got a fleet of 11 ships together to sail to Botany Bay and start a new penal settlement. There was 2 Royal Navy ships, there was 6 transport ships and 3 store ships. And on the transport ship Charlotte, the geese were honking. On the Golden Grove store ship, the Reverend Richard Johnson's wife, Mary, was nursing their cat. And on HMS Sirius, Captain Phillip had his greyhounds, and Sergeant George Worgan was playing his piano on the ship. The ships weren't all that big. For example, the transport ship Lady Penrhyn, carrying female convicts, it was a new ship. It was built in 1786. It was 103 feet long and it could carry 338 tons of cargo. And while these ships were laying at anchor, the convicts, chained at their wrists and ankles, were arriving at Portsmouth Harbour in two-wheel open carriages from London's jails, prison hulks, Norwich Castle. There was pickpockets, horse thieves, house burglars, female shoplifters with babies, all sick with fevers and scratching with lice. At the seashore, the convicts were reminded to behave themselves. There was dead bodies on posts, gibbets. After the convicts were rowed out to the ships, their chains were taken off, and the men convicts were given a linen shirt, trousers, shoes, a hat, and a grey cotton jacket. The female convicts were given yarn stockings, woolen drawers, canvas petticoat, a cap, and tubs to wash in. Down in their prison holes on the transport ships, the oak walls that divided the other sections of the ship from their prison were studded with sharp steel nails to stop the convicts from breaking through to the other areas of the ship. Loopholes were placed in convenient spots so that the Marines could fire their muskets should the convicts try to break out. So, early in the morning on the 13th of May 1787, on board HMS Sirius, they had church service to bless the fleet, and Captain Phillip read aloud the Act of Parliament for King George's ships sailing on the sea. The fleet were escorted by HMS Hyena. The fleet sailed westward from the Isle of Wight, and at 9 a.m. they passed through the jagged rocks called the Needles and into the English Channel. And HMS provided a safeguard from mutiny by the convicts, as had happened on the Swift transport in 1783 and the Mercury transport in 1784. With this in mind, Captain Phillip had all the convicts put in leg irons, and this is what the leg irons look like. There, you've got two iron cuffs there on either ankle. Then you've got this chain here, and you hold the chain up by a leather thong that comes up around the waist. And if you didn't have that leather thong holding the chains up, the chain would drag on the ground and it would catch things and trip over. You can walk pretty fast in these chains, but you cannot stride out, you cannot run. On the Charlotte transport ship, it was having trouble keeping up with the rest of the fleet. So HMS Hyena took the Charlotte in tow, using a strong tow rope. At nightfall, HMS Sirius would put a bright oil light on top of the topmast to guide the other ships. On the 20th of May, Captain Phillip sent an order out to the transport ships to release the convicts from their leg irons. That evening, as the ships were sailing westward of the Scilly Islands, the warship Hyena took leave and sailed back to Portsmouth. Now the ships were sailing on the Atlantic Ocean. Each day the convicts were let out of their prison holes in relays of 12 to exercise on deck. If the weather was fine, they would dance to the music of a fife and drum. While they were up on deck, down below in their sleeping quarters, vinegar was sprinkled around to kill the bugs, and gunpowder was burnt off to freshen the air. On Saturday, the 2nd of June, 1787, after sailing 3 weeks, the ships came to their first port of call, Tenerife in the Canary Islands. One evening, a convict named John Powers, who was filling a barrel with fresh water, he escaped in a rowboat. And while the Marines were chasing after Powers, there was rebellion on the transport ship Scarborough. The convict Philip Farrell, who had been Yeoman Sheets, a seaman employed with sails and rigging, and Thomas Griffiths, who was once a master of a French privateer, they both schemed to seize the ship. When they were found out, they were taken to the flagship Sirius, and the 2 convicts were flogged with the cat-o'-nine tails. Each man was given 24 lashes and double ironed to restrict their movement. So they had 2 sets of these leg irons, and they could weigh up to 20 pounds. So that's very heavy, and you won't be going very far with that much weight around your ankles. Now the ship sailed into the tropics, and at the equator, the decks were sponged down with the antiseptic oil of tar to kill the lice, cockroaches, and deter the rats. At the equator, the ships fell into the doldrums. The wind dropped altogether, becalming the ships, and the sailors were jumping into the sea to cool off. Because of the heat, down in the prison holes, the convicts were fainting and fitting. And sadly, Elizabeth Beckford, a 70-year-old convict, died. At noon each day on the flagship Sirius, a blackboard was lowered over its stern. Written on the blackboard in white chalk for the other captains to read was the ship's longitude position on the ocean. The longitude was calculated by a chronometer, a new sea clock. On Saturday, the 4th of August, the ship sailed to Rio de Janeiro. At Brazil, they brought tropical fruit, oranges, fresh beef, wine and rum. And as the ships were sailing away from South America to South Africa, the convicts on the transport ship Alexander tried to take over the ship, led by the artful John Powers and the Bird brothers, Sam and Jim. With so many Marine soldiers ill with seasickness, they planned to take the ship and turn it about. But the Marines overpowered them, and for punishment, they were stapled to the deck, and the 3 convicts were left in the sun. On the 13th of October, 1787, the ships moored in Table Bay, South Africa, where the Dutch had established a colony. And here Captain Phillip brought animals to stock the new penal settlement at Botany Bay. And if you listen to this song that I'm about to play, that you'll hear what type of animals that he bought and how many. There was 1 stallion, 3 mares, 3 colts, 1 bull, 6 cows and a bull calf, 44 sheep and 32 pigs and 5 rabbits for the stuff, 18 turkeys, 29 geese and 122 fowl, 35 ducks and 19 goats and 87 chickens at the bow. All crowing, whinny whinny moo moo, ma ma oink oink, gobble gobble gobble. Honk honk clack clack, ma na cheep 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 cheep. And the 87 chickens, well, they got loose and they're running all over the ship. And the cock-a-doodle-doo-doo, poo-poo, giving Captain Phillip the pip. So, the ships packed away their fresh supplies and the animals, they were securely penned. And the fleet of ships sailed away from South Africa, and they're on their last leg of their voyage from South Africa to Botany Bay. And this sailing took 9 weeks, sailing in the roaring 40s with bad storms and big waves. But by good seamanship, on January the 18th, 1788, HMS Supply, with Captain Phillip on board, they sailed into Botany Bay. And 2 days later, on the 20th of January 1788, all the ships were moored in Botany Bay. And amazingly, out to sea there was 2 French ships making their way to Botany Bay, the Boussole and the Astrolabe. And Captain Phillip, concerned that Botany Bay was exposed with the strong southerly wind and that it lacked a good fresh water supply, he sailed up to Port Jackson and found a big harbour sheltered from the ocean. And on Saturday, the 26th of January 1788, the English flag was planted at Sydney Cove to take possession of the land for Great Britain. And when the convicts were coming off the ships, they were chained to one another, just like these fellows. 11 days after all the ships had moored in Sydney Cove, on the 6th of February 1788, the female convicts came off the ships. And there to meet them was the seamen with their rum bottles. And they had one big party. And while it rained with lightning all through the night, they laughed and sang merrily. And that's how Australia got started. It was populated with folk with a rebellious spirit. This song is for the sad convicts that have left their home and their loved ones. The Convict Lament. Farewell to me rum goes as well. Farewell to the well-known Old Bailey, where once she still looks at the swell, singing to rely, rely out a tear, singing to rely, rely, singing to